Hey loves, Toni here from TL Yarn Crafts, and thanks so much for picking up a copy of the Loveland Shawl. I fell in love while making this project, and I know you will too. In this video, I'm taking you through each section of the pattern with a bit of finishing at the end. A separate blocking video will be available after April 22nd, 2020. If you need additional help with your pattern, feel free to post a question in the TLYC Makers Facebook group or email me at tlyarncrafts@gmail.com. Now let's get started. First, let's talk supplies. The original sample of the Loveland Shawl was made with xoxo's Merino DK. That's what I have here. There are links directly to the yarn that I used in the pattern. For your project, you will need 2 different colors, and you'll need about 450 yards of each of these colors. These skeins come in 230 yards, which would give you 460 yards apiece, so I had just about 10 yards left over of each of these colors when I finished my shawl. If you're substituting other yarns, I still recommend a DK weight, which is a little bit lighter than worsted, a little bit heavier than sport, and that'll give you some really nice drape and use a reasonable amount of yarn. Again, you're going to need 450 yards in 2 different colors. In addition to your yarn, you're going to need a pair of scissors, a stitch marker, and a tapestry needle, and you'll need a 6.5mm Tunisian crochet hook. This one comes from one of the sets that I have. If you're interested in investing in a Tunisian crochet hook set, I have a link in the description below to a video that I created that compares 5 of my favorite hook sets. So for the pattern, you're going to need a 6.5mm hook as well as a 47-inch cord. A corded Tunisian crochet hook is absolutely necessary, whether you have one with a fixed cord or an interchangeable cord like the one I have here, doesn't matter, but you will need a corded Tunisian crochet hook because the rows will get very, very long and straight hooks will not end up being long enough. For the sake of our tutorial, I'm using a slightly heavier yarn in different colors, and I'm using a larger hook to compensate that yarn change. This pattern is broken up into 4 main parts. The first part is this solid section where we'll mainly be using the Tunisian knit stitch and our first color. The next section will transition into some stripes where we'll introduce our second color but still continue with our Tunisian knit stitch pattern. Part 3 is this mesh or lace section where we'll use just our second color and a series of Tunisian knit stitches and yarn overs to create this open and lacy texture. And then lastly, we have our border, which is a series of purl stitches, and then the final bind off. We'll end our shawl with finishing, which includes closing up the gap that'll be created here at the top of our shawl, as well as blocking. The blocking video will be live in the description below once it is available on April 22nd, 2020. Now we're ready to get started, and we're going to start off with our solid section. So I've got my hook, got my cord attached with my stopper. I'm going to grab my A color, whichever is the first color that you want to use. I'm going to leave a nice long tail. It says in the pattern about 4 inches. I know this is much more than 4 inches, but better safe than sorry. We will need this later, so don't skip this step. Leave a nice long tail before you make a slip knot here. Just like that, insert and tighten down. We're going to begin with a chain 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now I left those chains loose intentionally because we'll need to work into those. So we're going to flip to the back of our chain so we can see those back bumps because that's where we'll pull up our loops. So we're going to pull up a loop in the second chain from the hook and each remaining chain. So this is our first chain, this is our second chain. Insert your hook under that loop, yarn over, pull up a loop, and leave that loop on your hook. And do that for each chain going down. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop. Insert, yarn over, pull up a loop. And do that all the way down your chain. This last one can sometimes fight with you. Oh, it's being nice today. Perfect. So when we finish, we'll want to have 7 loops on our hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So that completes the forward pass for row 1. As it says in the pattern, all the instructions for the rows are the forward pass only, and now we have to do the return pass. So the return pass for this row and each row in the pattern is exactly the same. We're going to start off by yarning over and pull through 1, essentially making a chain, and then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through the next 2 loops on your hook, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way down until we have just 1 loop left on our hook. yarning over and pulling through 2. Now we've got 1 loop left on our hook and we're ready to move on to row 2. Now, one tip that I will give you to make sure you have a nice clean edge along the right side of your work is when you finish your return pass, just tighten down the loop that's on your hook. That's going to make sure you have a nice clean edge on the right side here and that your tension doesn't get a little wonky. All right, now we're ready to move on to row 2 and we're going to begin our Tunisia knit stitches. The loop on your hook counts as your first stitch, so we're going to skip this first vertical bar and we're going to look at the 2 vertical bars for the next stitch. So we've got a front bar and a back bar. We're going to insert our hook from the front to the back of our work going between those bars. So insert between that bar, yarn over, and pull up a loop. That's the Tunisian knit stitch. We'll follow that with a yarn over from back to front around our hook. Leave that yarn over on your hook. Now we're going to do that Tunisian knit stitch yarn over 4 total times. So we've done it once here. We're going to go to the next stitch, going between the front and back bar, yarn over and pull up a loop. Follow that with a yarn over. There's 2. Here's 3 and 4. Now we're going to do another Tunisian knit stitch in this next stitch. And Tunisian simple stitch the last stitch. So we're going to rotate this work towards us, find the front and back bar of that last stitch, and make sure we work under both loops of that last stitch. And that will make sure we have good clean tension and a nice edge along the left side of our work. We'll yarn over and pull up a loop. So now we should have 11 stitches on our hook. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. We got it. So now, of course, we follow that with a return pass. Again, to do that, we yarn over and pull through just 1 to essentially make a chain, then yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way back until we have just 1 loop left on our hook. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Tighten down that first loop, and this is what things look like after our second row. Now we can move on to row 3. Remember that this first loop on your hook counts as your first stitch, so we're skipping this loop right here and we're going to move into the next stitch, which is this one, and we'll Tunisian knit stitch that stitch. So insert between the bars of that stitch, yarn over and pull up a loop. Now we're going to yarn over, that's an increase, and we're going to Tunisian knit stitch each of the next 3 stitches. So the next stitch is actually a yarn over. We're going to work that just like we would any other stitch, inserting between the front and back bar of that stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. So there's 1 Tunisian knit stitch, the next stitch as well, there's 2, and the next stitch is also a yarn over. You can tell it's a yarn over because that left leg slants a little bit. So we're going to insert between those bars, yarn over and pull up a loop. So we've got our first stitch, a Tunisian knit stitch, a yarn over, and 3 more knit stitches on our hook already. Now we're going to yarn over, that's also an increase, and we're going to Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch. And this is actually our center stitch. Now this is going to matter a lot more when we get to the mesh section, but just keep this in mind. You're welcome to mark this stitch and move your marker up throughout the pattern, but when we get to the mesh stitch, this is going to be pretty imperative just so we can make sure we can identify this stitch. Now we're going to yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch each of the next 3 stitches. So the next stitch is a yarn over, working between the front and back leg of those. Next stitch, Tunisian knit stitch. Next stitch, which is a yarn over, working right between those, Tunisian knit stitch. Now we're going to yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch. And now we're at our last stitch. We're going to rotate this towards us. We can find the front and back bar of that stitch. Insert under both of those loops, just like that. Yarn over and pull through. Follow that with a chain 1 and complete our return pass. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over and pull through 2 all the way to the end of the row. The return pass is always so soothing. I just feel so accomplished when I'm doing long rows of return passes. There we go. So at this point, you can count to make sure you have the right number of stitches. You should have 15. And as you'll notice, we're going up by 4 total stitches in each row. And the way that we're going up is by including yarn over. So there's a yarn over here, one before and after the center stitch, and then one before the last 2 stitches. And that's how we're increasing in our pattern. Now for row 4, we'll Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch. Just open it up if you need to. I just like to pick up that first leg and then go through the back of my work. Follow that by a yarn over, and then we'll Tunisian knit stitch all the way up to the yarn over before the center stitch. So Tunisian knit stitch this yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch, the stitch after that. These are all Tunisian knit stitches. Now we're at the yarn over before the center stitch. We're going to Tunisian knit stitch that stitch, yarn over for our increase, Tunisian knit stitch the center stitch, and yarn over. So we're increasing at both ends and in the center. And now we're going to Tunisian knit stitch until the next yarn over, which is right before those last 2 stitches. So knit stitch the yarn over and knit stitch each stitch until we get to that next yarn over. So we just Tunisian knit stitched the yarn over your hook, Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch, and Tunisian simple stitch the last stitch. Make sure you're getting under both loops of that stitch so you have a nice clean edge. Yarn over and pull through. So we can count these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, and 19. Again, continuing to increase by 4 each row. Yarn over, chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2, and complete that yummy return pass. Yarn over, pull through 2 all the way back, maintaining good tension, completing our return pass. And of course, when we finish that return pass, we're going to tighten down on that first loop so we have good tension along this side of our work. Now, if we take a look at what we've got here, we can already see that we've got a nice area of Tunisian knit stitches between yarn overs. We've got our center stitch, which creates a really beautiful rib down the middle of our work. So for the rest of the solid section, you're going to continue to repeat row 4. So we're going to do that again together. So we're going to start off by Tunisian knit stitching the next stitch. So remember, this loop on our hook counts as our first stitch. So we're skipping this first bar here. I'm opening my work up to find that next stitch, which is right here. Sometimes it can get a little lost, but you can easily find it just by working your project a little bit. So Tunisian knit stitch that first stitch, yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch the yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch each stitch to the next yarn over. So working between the front and back bar of those stitches, however you need to, and go at the pace that works best for you. We're back at another yarn over, which we can identify because it's got that leaning left leg. We're going to Tunisian knit stitch that stitch, yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch the center stitch, yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch this yarn over. Tunisian knit stitch each stitch to the next yarn over, just like that. Working between the front and back bar of these stitches. We're now back at the yarn over. There's a little space around it. We've got that leaning left leg there. Tunisian knit stitch this stitch, yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch the following stitch, Tunisian simple stitch the next stitch. Chain 1, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, all the way back. So we're going to repeat this row essentially until we run out of yarn for our first skein of yarn, or basically until you're done with the first half of your yarn for color A. So I'm going to work up a few more rows on my swatch here, and then you can join me back here for the striped section. So I've continued working on my swatch here. Those Tunisian knit stitches are just working up so beautifully. We've got our center stitch with the yarn overs in between it. Now, one thing that you will notice as you continue with your shawl, and you can see it right here, is that your yarn overs on the right side of your shawl will look a little different than the yarn overs on the left side. That isn't an issue for me. I think it looks really pretty, so that's how the original sample is created. If you are comfortable with Tunisian crochet and want to switch that up to make sure that these sides look the same, you are more than welcome to, but I'm going to continue on with the pattern as written. So I'm working on a return pass here, and I'm ready to move on to my stripe section where I will incorporate my second color. So to incorporate your second color, you want to finish off this row with your A color until you have 2 loops left on your hook. This is where we're going to change color. So this is assuming that you're pretty much done with your A color, the first skein at least, and you're ready to move on to the second skein or the second half of your yarn. So now we can move on to the stripe section. So we're going to drop our first color, pick up our second color, and yarn over. And we're going to pull up under both of these loops with our new color. And now we're going to start working with our new color in the same exact stitch pattern that we've been doing before. So for our stripe section, we're going to do 1 row of B and then switch back to A and do 2 rows of A, 1 row of B, 2 rows of A. For my sample, I was able to get 24 total rows in my stripe section, but you'll basically do that until you run out of color A. So we're going to get right back into our stitch pattern, which begins with Tunisian knit stitching the first stitch, yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch the yarn over, Tunisian knit stitch each stitch to the center stitch, just like we've been doing before. But now we'll be doing this with our B color. So continue on this row, meet me back at the end. I'll show you how we'll switch back to our A color and continue on with our striped section. Finishing up the return pass with my B color, and remember we just do 1 row of B, 2 rows of A. So I'm going to finish up this return pass until I have 2 loops left right here. I'm going to drop my color and grab my new one. I'm going to pick it up basically under and to the left of the color that I just dropped. This basically locks in that color change and makes it so we don't have any weird loops hanging out on the left side. Now I am carrying my color up my work. You're welcome to cut and add your colors in each row if you want to. I just carry them up because it's easier and it makes it for a lot less ends to weave in. So that's how you'll change color throughout this project. And we'll just continue on with our stripe section until we run completely out of our A color. And then we'll be ready to move on to our mesh section, which uses just our B color. Here I've worked up a couple of my stripe section just to give you a feel for what it'll look like as you continue. But I'm ready to move on to my mesh section. So what I've done is finished up my stripe section with 2 rows of my color A. I'm now ready to cut and fasten off basically my color A. So I'm going to leave a nice long tail for weaving in later. And I'm going to get rid of color A and we're going to work just with color B for the rest of our shawl. So I've already changed color and I'm ready to start working with color B. So I'm going to start off with a Tunisian knit stitch in the next stitch. And then I'm going to yarn over. Now I'm going to Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch, which is my yarn over. I'm going to yarn over my hook and skip the next stitch. And that's going to be the repeat. Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch, yarn over, skip the next. Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch, yarn over, skip the next. Knit 1, yarn over, skip 1. Knit 1, yarn over, skip 1. Knit 1, yarn over, skip 1. And we're going to do that all the way until we get to the yarn over before the center stitch. So keep going with your knit 1, yarn over, skip 1, knit 1, yarn over, skip 1. Yarn over and skip one. So this is the one that we're skipping, and now we're at the yarn over before the center stitch. So this is our center stitch. Remember that nice clean spine that's going down the middle of our shawl. This is the yarn over before that stitch, and this is a stitch that we're skipping. So at this point, we want to knit one, yarn over, knit that center stitch, and yarn over. And then we're going to go right back into our knit one, yarn over, skip one. Now what I'm going to do before we get to the other side of our shawl, just to make sure I can find it later, is I'm going to mark that center stitch, because I will need to be able to find it very clearly. And the reason we've been able to find it before is that it's the only stitch here in the middle surrounded by yarn overs. Well, now we're yarning over between all of our stitches, so it's going to be a little trickier to find that center stitch. So the stitch marker helps. You can either leave it there or carry it up with you. Now we're going to get right back into our pattern, which is knit one, yarn over, skip one. Knit one, yarn over, skip one. And continue that all the way down this side of our shawl. Make sure you're keeping your tension even, not too tight or not too loose, just like you've been doing through the rest of your shawl. Feed yourself some yarn as you need it, and make sure you're scooting those loops down so things don't get too tight on your hook. So there was our knit one, yarn over, skip one, knit one, yarn over, skip one, all the way down, and this helps to begin establishing our mesh. And we're going to work this all the way until we get to our next yarn over. Knit one, yarn over, skip one, knit one, yarn over, skip this next stitch, and here we are at our yarn over. With this yarn over, we're going to knit it, yarn over, and then Tunisian knit stitch the next stitch, and Tunisian simple stitch the last stitch. Chain one, yarn over, pull through two, all the way back. Now maintaining your tension for your return pass is going to be important here, because we don't want those yarn overs to get too loose. So again, it's not anything special you have to do, just make sure you're maintaining your tension through this whole section. So finish up your return pass, meet me back here for row 2 of our mesh section. I finished my return pass and just want to show you kind of what we've got after row 1. So after row 1, you can see we have our knit stitches, which are here. We've got the front and back leg of our knit stitches like normal. And then we have our yarn overs. And you can see those really clearly because now with the number of yarn overs we have and the fact that we skipped a stitch, both the left leg and the right leg of that yarn over are slanted. So they're much, much easier to see now. So now we can move on to row 2. I finished my return pass. I've got one loop left on my hook. So I'll Tunisian knit stitch the first stitch. Follow that with a yarn over. And then this is where we begin our repeat for our row. We're going to knit the next yarn over, which is right here. Follow that with a yarn over, skip the next stitch, which is our knit stitch. And that's the repeat. Knit the yarn over, skip one. Knit the yarn over, skip one. Going right between the bars of that stitch, knit the yarn over, skip one. And we're just going to repeat that all the way down until we get to the yarn over before the center stitch. Knit the yarn over, skip one, knit the yarn over, skip one. Maintaining really good tension throughout. I find the easiest way for me to maintain tension when doing Tunisian crochet is to make sure I have plenty of slack on my yarn and it doesn't get too tight on me. So I've got my center stitch marked. I know that it's right here. I've done my Tunisian knit stitch. I'm going to yarn over and skip the next stitch. I'm going to knit the yarn over, knit the center stitch, yarn over. Now I go right back into my stitch pattern, knit the yarn over, skip one, knit the yarn over, skip one, knit the yarn over, and skip one. And that's what I'll do for my entire mesh section. So I'm going to finish up this row. Meet me back here. We'll start the next row together and then we'll be ready to move on. I'm finishing up my row here. Just need to yarn over, pull through those last two, tighten down on that loop to make sure we keep that nice clean tension along the side. And now we're ready to start our next row for our mesh where we just repeat row 2. So Tunisian knit stitch the first stitch, yarn over, and then we're going to get into our repeat. Knit the yarn over, skip one. Knit the yarn over, skip one, all the way down to the yarn over before the center stitch. Knit the yarn over, skip that knit stitch, knit the yarn over, knit the next yarn over, yarn over. It ends up being really rhythmic, and this is such a simple mesh pattern that honestly looks really beautiful on the right side, but once you block your project, you're going to notice that this looks gorgeous on the wrong side. So we're back up to our center stitch, and like I said, you can move that marker up so you can see it clearly as you continue to go. But I did my yarn over. I'm going to knit the next yarn over, knit the center stitch, yarn over. Now I'm going to get right back into my stitch pattern, knit the yarn over, knit the next yarn over. Just like that all the way down. I was able to complete 13 rows of my mesh with the yarn that I used. But basically you just want to work until you have maybe 30%, maybe a bit less of your bee color left, because we'll still need to do the border and binding off. So keep working and meet me here when you're ready to do your border. All right, so we are gonna move on from our mesh section, but you can see how beautifully it's working up already. And when you block it, it's just gonna open up even more. It's so gorgeous. I love it so much. Okay, moving on to our border section. So to start with row 1, we're gonna knit the next stitch, yarn over, and then we're going to knit the yarn over. So right here. And now we're going to purl each stitch until we get to the yarn over before the center stitch. So our next stitch is our knit stitch right here. We're going to bring our yarn to the front, insert under the front loop of that stitch, yarn to the front, then to the back, and yarn over. I like to hold kind of here at the bottom where this yarn has looped over this loop, pull it down a little bit so I can easily get my hook through. Now we want to purl this yarn over. So you can see we've got the front leg and the back leg. Bring our yarn to the front, insert under that front leg, yarn to the back, yarn over, hold, and pull through. Next stitch is a knit stitch, yarn to the front, insert under that loop, yarn to the back, yarn over, hold, and pull through. Yarn to the front, find the left leg of that yarn over, yarn to the back, yarn over, and pull through. We're going to purl each stitch until we get to the yarn over before the center stitch. Be really careful when you get to your yarn overs that you don't pull up the back leg, pull up that front leg right there. Yarn in front, insert, yarn to the back, yarn over, pull through. Insert, yarn to the back, yarn over, pull through. For that purl stitch, yarn in front, insert, yarn to the back, yarn over, pull through. And once you get the hang of it, you'll be able to go a little bit faster. Just make sure you're maintaining your tension and not skipping any stitches. So go as slow as you need to for as long as you need to. So I've completed my purl stitches all the way up to the yarn over before my center stitch. I'll actually want to knit this yarn over, knit the center stitch, yarn over, and then knit the following yarn over. Then I'm going to jump right back into my purl stitches until I get to the next yarn over. And when I get to that next yarn over, which is the one before my last 2 stitches, I'm going to knit that yarn over, knit the next stitch, simple the last stitch, and complete my return pass. So I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. Meet me back here for row 2 of our border section. That's row 1 of our border section done. You can tell these are Tunisian purl stitches because they've got those little purl bumps in front of the stitches, but we still have these nice tall loops to work into. So we'll do one more row of purl stitches for our border, and then we'll move on to our bind off. So I just have one more stitch to finish here. Remember that we start this row with knitting that next stitch, yarn over, knit the yarn over, and then we move into our purls. Yarn in front, insert under the loop, yarn to the back, yarn over and pull through. Yarn to the front, insert, yarn to the back, yarn over, and pull through. And we'll work this all the way up until we get to the yarn over before the center stitch, and we're just essentially repeating row 1 of our border section. So go ahead and complete that second row on your border, and then we'll bind off together and do a bit of finishing. I'm all done with my second row of purl stitches. So this is my first row and this is my second row. And the last thing I need to do as far as actively stitching is to do my slip stitch bind off. So I'm going to yarn over and pull through 2 to finish off this row. And for a slip stitch bind off, which we'll do just in each stitch across, regardless of whether it's a yarn over, a knit stitch, or a purl stitch, so we'll just insert under the front leg of that stitch, yarn over, pull through both loops on the hook. Don't forget this yarn over right here. Insert under the front leg, yarn over, pull through 2. Just make sure you do that slip stitch bind off loosely because we don't want the bottom of our shawl to pucker. If anything, it should be nice and loose so that when we block this, we'll have a gorgeous triangle shape. So insert, don't split your yarn like me. Yarn over, pull through both. Insert, yarn over, pull through both loops. So what we're left with is a really gorgeous edge, and it almost looks like this edge along the right side just wrapped right around and picked up along the bottom of our shawl. So we're going to complete that all the way across, all the way up this edge. When we get to this yarn over, slip stitch that. For the center stitch, slip stitch that as well. Make sure you slip stitch all the way down. When you get to the very edge stitch, make sure you insert under both loops of that last stitch, yarn over, and pull through both loops on your hook. Then when you're done with that, join me back here and I'll show you what we'll do with this gap here at the top of our shawl. Remember when we started our shawl, we started with a chain 7, and that leaves a little bit of a gap here that we want to seam close. So we'll want to find the top 6 stitches here. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Our 7th stitch is right here, but it's already kind of part of that nice clean edge, so we won't bother with that one. We're going to grab our tapestry needle and thread that nice long tail that we left at the beginning of our project. And we're going to insert our needle through the first stitch and the 6th stitch. Pull that nice and close, then through the 2nd and the 5th stitch. Pull that nice and close, and then through our last 2 stitches. Pulling it tight, and then we're going to just drop this needle through the back of our work. And you can see we've got a nice clean seam here. Flip this to the back, and then we'll just want to weave it in. So we'll want to work under several loops, and we've got what essentially looks like purl bumps back here. So we can pull up under those purl bumps in one direction and then go back in another direction to make sure they're nice and secure. And that's how I like to weave in my ends for Tunisian crochet. Definitely going in a few different directions just to make sure everything is nice and secure. Alrighty, so if we zoom out a little bit, this is essentially what our shawl looks like. We can pop this stitch marker out, flatten that out, weave in that end, weave in these ends, snip that off, and you're done with this part. Now, if you're watching this tutorial before April 22nd, the blocking video is not quite ready yet, but return on April 22nd and there will be a link down in the description for the blocking video. If you're watching this after the 22nd, lucky you, the blocking video is already up and you can go ahead and block your shawl. Then you'll be all done with your Loveland shawl.